it is a Friday, so we thought our big interview perhaps can be on something that does affect all of us, but perhaps something a little different from the usual. What can you do with someone else's intellectual property? So let's say you subscribe to a digital platform. It could be Eyewitness News, News 24, The Daily Maverick, The Guardian, and so on. Can you simply click and share and tell someone else that they have to read this or that piece? Your school, your church group, your youth group is putting on a play. They want to perform this play. Is it as simple as learning your lines and then putting on a performance? Oh, I don't know. Let's say you own a fantastic painting by a fabulous new artist. Can you put that image on your wedding invitations and distribute to your friends and family? Not so fast. Say Delro, the dramatic, artistic and literary rights organization, they manage and license copyright on behalf of rights holders, from plays and musicals to paintings, photographs, sculptures, obviously books, but right down to poems and even newspaper articles. So I was invited to their launch last night, and it was one of those moments where my jaw was literally dropping because there was so much they were telling us you and I cannot do that I know for sure we do every day. So I'm very pleased to tell you we've got in the studio the managing director of Delro, Mr. Lazarus Serobe. A very good morning to you and welcome. I mean, copyright law isn't something that's necessarily new, but so many of us are in the dark about what we are allowed to do and not.
Good morning, Bongani, and thank you for inviting me to the studio. Yeah, copyright is very old. It's one of the oldest laws in the world, actually. But even up to today, people struggle with what to do and what not to do.
Why can't I do all the things I just listed?
Because it is the property of someone else, and using anybody's property, whether intellectual or physical, without their permission is in physical property trespassing, in copyright infringement.
But hang on, I mean, I've bought the painting, I've bought the photograph, I paid for it. That's why it's hanging on my wall.
And you have the right to enjoy that on your wall, as you say, Bongani. But to reproduce it, make copies of it, put it on, let's say, coffee mugs for Christmas presents to your folks, all you need is get the author's permission, the painter's permission. Because when you bought that lovely painting to enjoy, he did not give up his right to reproduction.
So even though I own the physical copy, the intellectual property is still his or hers?
Yes, indeed. It is theirs.
All right, how about one? My employer subscribes to a publication. I mean, my team and I do this, I must confess, right? We're sharing it as part of executing our duties on behalf of said subscriber, the organization we work for. What's wrong with that?
It is, and there's nothing wrong with sharing a newspaper article, provided you get the permission. You know, we always say, do it, but do it legally, do it correctly. Remember, somebody has taken their effort to write it up, and journalist has worked on it maybe for days on end. The publisher has taken their effort to publish it. They need to be remunerated back so that they can produce more.
Yeah, but my organization subscribes to it, so why can't all 500 of us within said organization share it amongst ourselves?
Because that is 499 deprivations of income for the author, for the journalist and the publisher.
So what you're saying is I can't download and store articles without consent?
There are, within limits you can. Excuse me. Within limits you can do all of that for personal purposes, for your own personal use. You are allowed to share. So we always say, caution people, say it's not doomsday. As long as you don't do it in such a way that it's commercial, you're doing or depriving the author of income, or competing with the author, doing something that they would have liked to do themselves, i.e. to distribute to those 500 people for some benefit.
If I tweet it?
Same thing. We have these days problems with people. I don't know. I'm not a social media person. I don't know if you can tweet this, but on social media, people sharing whole books, PDFs of a novel that they like, and they send it to their friends and or colleagues or book clubs, like you say, or church groups. You can share the Bible, but not all other.
God doesn't mind. I mean, surely on some level, somebody listening to us might say, but that is probably going to be quite onerous, because what you're really saying is, even if I subscribe to something, if I want to share it, let's say with you, I've got to tell you to go and subscribe to that platform and say, there's an incredible piece on such and such a platform. Why don't you subscribe it? Go subscribe yourself and go look at it.
Indeed, that's what it is. Remember, think of it this way. You have subscribed. You've taken the trouble to subscribe. Why does your friend not do the same? Subscribe and therefore get the benefit to enjoy those articles or content, whatever it is, just like you do.
So you're relying on essentially people's goodwill here, because proving these infringements would be near impossible.
It is absolutely difficult. There are worse than there are others where they are very obvious. They amount to piracy, where people copy whole books to sell, and it happens there are copy shops. So those are easier to detect than, especially in the digital world. The digital world has become a very big problem for authors. They're losing a lot of the benefits.
If I'm a copyright holder, how do I prove the work was mine?
There are various ways to prove. Essentially, you can show the footprint of that, where it started, maybe the different drafts, to say this is where it began and it grew to that. Or you've shared it with someone beforehand, and they can also vouch for you that it is yours. Generally, with books, you would have sent it to your publisher as a manuscript, and therefore it can be traced back to its origin. Or you can, as we always say, email it to somebody, email it to yourself, so that it's got a date stamped to show that this your copyright predates whatever the infringers.
I remember approaching potential funders for an idea I had for a television program, and we had approached a number of would-be partners, broadcasters, and potential sponsors, and the thing didn't really get anywhere. But to my horror, a few months down the line, there it was on a screen in my home, right down to the very name. And my first reaction was that, well, how could I have copyrighted it? Is that a verb even?
Yeah, it is a verb, actually. It has become a verb in the English world. Look, it's very difficult. Copyright does not apply to ideas. You've got to reduce it to a material form somehow. You've got to have a manuscript to show. You've got to have maybe some videos, if it's a pilot, for instance, of a show. But once it's just an idea that you're talking about, then it's not copyrightable. Ideas are not copyrightable until they're reduced to a material format.
But what about the argument that surely if something is online, it is now already in the public domain and is therefore free for all of us to use?
That is a very false perception. It does. It depends what it is. Sometimes authors and publishers will put something online with the permission for people to share, and often they will say you are permitted to share. Unless that is expressly stated, then it is not for sharing.
The thing that keeps on stunning me is that we do this all the time. We in the media do it. Hell, even media monitoring companies do this. Lawyers do this. They copy journals and they spread them amongst themselves.
Indeed. We
we
do, as Dalrop, give license to media monitoring companies. Most of them actually do it with permission. It's just that they don't announce it. So they are aware. What they should be doing is telling their customers as well to take up a license so that they can share it within their specific organizations. But media monitoring organizations, often, most of them do have a license to share with their clients.
Ignorance an excuse?
No, the law excuse is never ignorance is never an excuse to the law.
So ultimately, who do you represent? Do you represent the interests of the owners of the rights of the works?
Yes, we represent the interests of the authors, the publishers, the painters, the script writers, the playwrights. That's who we represent. But we also see our role as going beyond that to facilitate better use, to facilitate legal use by the users, so that there's a balance in what they're doing, to make it easier for users not to transgress the law.
And to educate the rest of us.
And to educate, indeed. That's a very important part of what we do.
Does copyright ever expire?
Yes, it does. It's limited in time. So generally speaking, copyright subsists for 50 years after the death of the author. So it will live for 50 years after the author has died. So during his lifetime, it's there, and then 50 years later, after he dies, generally speaking, there are exceptions.
What about the democratization of content? I mean, part of the fallist movement was around bringing down the costs of education and access to information. Isn't that a right?
That is indeed a right and a privilege for most people, right? But it is not an author's obligation to grant that. It is a state's obligation if they are going to give free education. So the state should then make a provision for learners to do that. However, let me also say that copyright allows the copying of educational material for personal use. Again, a student can copy. There are instances where they can copy legally for their own use, for research. Journalists can copy for critique, for reporting the news. You are allowed to copy. There are exceptions, so it's not that stringent.
It's not that stringent. All right, if you want more information, I guess, go to Dalro's website. That would be what? www.dalro.co.za. Dalro being D-A-L-R-O. All right, Lazarus, Serobe, appreciate your time. I think this has been quite a lesson. When I went to your event last night, I thought, gosh, 702 Land needs to hear about this, because I think so many of us who are users of copyright material don't know this. But also it's important, I think, for the creators to know they've got a space where their rights can be protected.